All right, so welcome back. And we're glad you're here. We have a smaller team tonight because Wednesdays are generally not great for a good number of our team, but we have me, Gabrielle, and two dive masters in training, Ximena and Jacob, both of whom will be teaching with me tonight. And of course, we have Maddie and Will who are taking the class with us. Maddie and Will, have you had a chance to read a good chunk of the book yet?
Yeah, we were reading over it a little bit.
Good. Good. That'll help you with tonight too. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and I'm going to just go over some things that I think will be helpful to you. The teaching team is the same, although there's just a few of us. We want to go over the swimming requirements and make sure that you're ready for those, the exit requirements especially. So really get in the pool and practice those things, including the 50-foot underwater swim, and you can have a push-off, and then the 300-yard surface swim and the 15 minutes of treading water. All right, let's do some review questions and make sure that you remember some things. And some of these things I don't expect that you'll necessarily remember, but hopefully it will be helpful. Pressure. What depth is 1 atmosphere absolute below the surface?
What atmosphere absolute below the surface? That would be 0 feet, wouldn't it?
How many feet?
0 feet, that'd be at surface level, wouldn't it? Because
right. What's the one level below that?
Isn't it 33 feet?
Yeah.
32
it's 33 feet for salt water.
And 34.
That's right. Good. 34 for fresh water. And remember 14.7 PSI is also 1 atmosphere. What is air composed of? The air we breathe on the surface and the air we breathe in our scuba cylinders.
Oxygen, nitrogen, a small bit of carbon dioxide, and some other small things.
Right. What percentage of nitrogen and oxygen specifically?
What percentage specifically? I can't remember that off the top of my head. Okay.
What about you, Maddie? Do you remember?
No, I don't remember it.
Okay, 78%, and we're rounding up and down here. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 1% other. Can you remember what Boyle's law is? Think of Boyle's balloons.
Boyle's law, isn't that the one where it talks about how, like, under a fluid, like the amount of fluid on top of that increases the total pressure, or is that something completely different?
That's something completely different. Boyle's balloons. 2 things are inversely
so that's talking about how, like,
proportional.
the amount of pressure exerted on the surface of like a fluid like air, like that can, like, under 2 atmospheres, that would double the density of air, wouldn't it?
So it's pressure and volume are inversely proportional. You're on the right track. Pressure and volume are inversely proportional. What about Dalton's law? Do you remember what that is? It basically says that each gas acts independently. So the total pressure of a mixture of gases is equal to the partial pressure of the component gases, and each gas acts independently. All right, what about Henry's law?
Henry's law.
Remember the old man sitting on the front porch named Henry, drinking an old soda bottle? That might help you. It has to do with the absorption of gases into the tissues in our body. So the amount of gas that is dissolved is proportional to the partial pressure of that gas. What about Archimedes' principle? This one should be easy.
Oh, it's that about water displacement, right?
Right. Upward force is the upward buoyant force is equal to the fluid that the body displaces in water. So very good. All right, let's go over some easier ones. Scuba cylinders need an annual visual inspection and a 5-year hydrostatic test. Can you remember what fraction of how full does a cylinder get with a 5-year hydrostatic test? To what fraction is it?
5/3.
Yes, very good. 5/3. At what temperature, Maddie, do we need wetsuits typically?
Wasn't it, I think it was 83?
80 degrees. 83 for those of us, like me and Ronny and maybe you who get cold easily. But 80 is the general rule. Which color is the first one to disappear as you descend?
Red.
Red.
How do objects appear underwater as compared to on land?
They
Grayish.
appear closer.
Very good, closer and larger. How often should you clear your ears when you're diving?
Um,
Good question.
Not a number, it's an amount. It's like it's not a magic number. It's a thing.
All right, I'll tell you. It's early and often.
Yeah.
Early
For
and
a
often.
number.
And what's the cardinal rule of scuba diving when it comes to breathing?
But,
never hold your
keep-
breath.
Right. Never hold your breath. Always breathe. And one reason we focus on ears so much is we don't want you to hurt your ears. So let me just review a couple of things with ear changes. You know, when you have a normal eardrum versus if you have squeeze, it's going to be, you know, pressing in. If you have reverse block, it's going to possibly cause you vertigo as you're ascending. Clear early and often. If you don't clear early and often, you're going to end up with something called middle ear barotrauma. Now, do both of you know how to clear your ears, and you've cleared them on planes and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Good. Just remember that ear clearing underwater may be very different on scuba, very different than on land. And so it is really important to practice clearing your ears and make sure you clear. So when we descend, we're gonna practice clearing. And then if you feel pain or pressure, you stop. Don't go any deeper. Focus on relaxing your breathing, maybe even come up a little bit, not all the way to the top. Try to clear again before descending. We don't ever want to have barotrauma. Barotrauma, by the way, means pressure injury. And so we don't want any pressure injuries in our ears. And I do have some things that help, some products that help. Dox Pro plugs and Ear Shield are two things that help. And we did go over ear clearing and different ways to do it. Do you remember those methods? Yeah, so go back to the last lecture and just kind of practice those in advance of our pool session. That will be helpful too. Okay. So scuba regulators, and Ximena,
This
at
is
what,
where I start.
I thought so. Okay. I was like, at what point do you take over?
Now.
Yay.
Yeah.
Any questions so far with the review? Okay, great.
Okay, so we're just going to touch on scuba regulators. And we talked about this a bit last week, but basically there's several parts to it. What this does is it provides the air from the cylinder to the diver, and this is done through different pressure varies, so 2 pressure stages. The first stage is the one that connects actually to your cylinder, and it controls that initial airflow that comes out. And then the demand open circuit, so you have your first stage is the cylinder port, your second stage is your regulator that goes into your mouth. So the outlet ports is a little bit later on you'll kind of get into, but the initial port where the air comes from the cylinder is at 7/16. Sometimes they vary on the outside, but it's 3/8 for the one that actually connects to your breathing, the one that connects to your power inflator, and if you use a dry suit, the one that connects to your dry suit. It's very important to care for your regulators. If you're using Gabrielle's, they're very expensive. You don't want to have to replace it. And if you ever have your own, you'll realize how expensive they are. So you definitely want to take care of them. Generally in springs, that's kind of clean, fresh water. And so, you know, we might clean them if it's sandy or things like that. You want to make sure nothing's in them. But if you go into salt water, you need to clean them a little bit extra. It's important to rinse them after each dive. If you're going through a lot of dives or intense dives, then soap, what we used in one of my courses is a large bin, and it has like a special kind of liquid in it, and you mix it. There's different things you can work with that. The most important part though is to always put your dust cap back on. You want this on regardless of if you're going to rinse it off or not. The minute you take it off of the cylinder, go ahead and put the dust cap on because you don't want anything getting in there. And also when you're rinsing it, you do not press the purge button because then water is going to seep into the air portion. Every year you need to get it professionally serviced, and every 2 years they do like a whole overhaul on it. So you'll take it to a shop, and sometimes when you go to certain places, they'll ask to see that that would be like a very safe scenario. If you're doing courses and you're using your own, they'll ask to see that certification, but you want to do that anyway, because if you have your own stuff, you want to make sure it's working properly so you live. Care of gear at a resort. If you're on a dive boat or you go to a resort, when you finish a dive, you'll come out and you'll see these containers. Sometimes they'll be marked, sometimes they won't, but you want to kind of clean the more sensitive stuff first, right? So you're to put your dust cap back on, clean your regulator out, clean your mask circle, and then the last thing you would clear out is your BC, because of course that's going to contain your buoyancy compensation device, because that's going to contain probably the most amount of things that's going to mix in. Sometimes on dive boats you'll have these two cleaning solutions. One will be for cameras and one will be generally for your mask. It's smaller, it's just to rinse in between dives and things. You don't want to interchange those two things, because cameras are really more sensitive than your dive mask, and it contains different things, so you don't want to do that. For your alternate air sources, so if you keep on going into more advanced stuff, or in certain scenarios you use a pony bottle. This can either be strapped around your chest or attached to your cylinder. And then of course your octopus, which we'll always use, but then Gabrielle informed me that in some places they do not have these, which is kind of crazy, but okay. And then they can be, of course, integrated into your BC. So your power inflator hose, your low pressure inflator hose that connects to your valve. So then you could use that too in the event of an emergency. Your different various information systems. You'll see these when we start diving. You'll have your analog console. This is going to, once you connect it and turn your air on, you'll be able to see the amount of air that you have in your cylinder. So it'll tell you your PSI. When you're actually diving, it'll tell you your depth. Oftentimes they have a compass on them. Some of them actually have a dive computer attached to them. So regardless of if you have a dive computer and are not attached to your console, or even the wrist one, you still want to plan your dives with your dive tables. This is just a secondary assistance, but you also need to have some sort of watch device, right? So if you're using a console that has a depth gauge and your PSI gauge, but no time telling device, you need to wear some type of waterproof watch, because of course, how else would you manage your time underwater and follow your dive plan? If you get a dive computer, you can put the dive plans in there. So that could be a secondary source after you use your dive tables. And then you will use a compass too for certain types of diving. So some of them are digital, and some consoles have, a regular use one. And then they also have some wrist use ones. You would mount them on your wrist, or like I said, they'll be on your console. Depending on the type of diving you're doing, this will, be useful or not.
And Ximena, I always like to ask students at this point, how many of you already knows how to use a compass?
I do.
You do?
Okay. Yeah.
And
if
explain briefly what the difference is underwater with using a compass. What's important underwater to keep in mind when using a compass?
So for any time I've gone underwater, one of the things that or that I always do is anytime before I drop, I try to use my compass in the direction that I'm going to be going, right? So you want to figure out where you are, like where your lines are. So whatever degree you're heading, north, south, east, west, like where your line was. So you get a placement of where you are. And then once you drop down, you re-get that placement. And so when they say always follow the lubber line, different people have different preferences, and it just depends on how comfortable you are. But a good, if you're not super comfortable with them, a good rule of thumb would be then to put your lubber line on what your initial outgoing direction is, and so that it'll tell you what your backwards direction is, right? How to get back to where you first started.
And just something to keep in mind, if we don't really get too much into compasses with open water, but it is important to keep in mind that if you're using one, two things, it needs to be very flat, because if it's tilted sideways underwater, it's really hard to keep it flat. So it needs to be flat and needs to be in the middle of your body. Otherwise, you're not going to have a good reading.
Yeah. And I was going to kind of get into that with this picture is it's good practice to practice on land. It's going to do the same thing on land as it is on underwater. And so the more comfortable you are with it on land, the more comfortable you're going to be with it underwater. And you'll recognize that Gabrielle says, if you're practicing on land, you'll notice that they can sometimes, you know, kind of get stuck a little bit and things like that. And that's stuff to think about when you're getting ready to go underwater. If you're going to use your lubber line for that directional purpose, make sure it's accurate, you know, so give it a little tap, make sure it's flat and so that it's in the correct position. And then again, once you drop, and if you're actually following it for whatever it is that you're doing using your compass, make sure you're keeping your hand, it's a position, and we won't get into that too much, but you know, you want to make sure that you're actually going in the direction that you think that you're going so that you can get back to where you think that you're going back to.
Okay,
So,
good. Let's move forward then.
yeah, so some accessories that you might use while diving is underwater flashlights. This would be it for like night dives or dusk dives, dawn dives, and then also in some low visibility situations, not all, a dive knife. Again, as you get more comfortable, you're going to want to have one of these, either a knife, a cutter, or a scissor. This is to help if you get entangled or, you know, for any other reason you might need one, but it's good practice to have it and to get comfortable with it. A dive flag. Can either of you tell me when you would use the dive flag? This is on the test, I think.
It is on the
When
test.
you are diving,
Yeah, when you are diving, when would you use this?
Maybe if you're in danger.
Well, you would use it before that happens. So in what scenario would you have to have a dive flag when you're diving?
when you enter the water.
I'm sorry?
When you enter the water.
When you enter the
Yes.
water.
Yeah, so you're definitely you have to post it before you get into the water. And this is used anytime you're in navigable waters. So anytime where there's the probability of a boat coming by, you know, this is when you want to use this. And obviously this is for your safety and protection so that they know that there's divers around and there's divers that might be exiting the water at some point. You don't get hit.
So where there's
And
not
then,
boat traffic, you don't need a dive flag, just so you know.
Correct.
When we go diving at Big Blue, there is potential for boat traffic, so we will have a dive flag. When we go diving at Cherokee, there's no potential for boats, and so there's no need for a dive flag.
And then a safety marker buoy, also called a safety sausage sometimes, but we like to say safety marker buoy. You are going to use this anytime you're in open water, in an area, you know, that might have choppy waves, or even if not, if it's a large expanse of water and you're like on a dive boat or something where you would need to be possibly found. And it's also good practice anytime you're not in a confined area to utilize this, because in case of an emergency, right, somebody can locate you and find you.
And SMB stands for surface marker buoy. Surface marker buoy.
Specialized equipment, we'll just touch over this real quick. If you guys continue on with your diving careers, you might get into some nitrox, which has advantages. You get to go deeper, you get to go for longer. It does require special training. And then in the future, if you want to keep on going, there's technical diving, which is just beyond recreational, where you're doing usually a task or something. Rebreathers, this is going to be basically clearing out the CO2 from the air that you're breathing so that you can rebreathe it. And then we're going to go real quick on a buddy system. What is a buddy? Why have a buddy? And how close you should swim. So the purpose of a buddy is to be safe. Your buddy is going to help you remember all the things that you may not be thinking of. So your buddy is like your friend. Before you even get ready to go diving, you will probably have a dive buddy that you have allocated to you. Or if you're going out, sometimes with Gabrielle, you won't have one specifically until you get there. But it's people who basically are prepared and know at least the dive site that you're going to, just like you, which can then you would chat with this person and they can help you understand what's going on in case somebody forget weather, things like that. Reminding you to put on gear. You'll remind them if you see them. And then as you set up your equipment, you'll both check each other's equipment just to make sure that nobody missed anything in the excitement of things, or to help you do it if you're having trouble. And then also to provide feedback or work as a team. So we're all human. None of us are perfect. Sometimes we forget things. Sometimes we need help. That's what you're there for your buddy, and your buddy is there for you. So a good buddy does a buddy check. Anytime you put your stuff on, or even before you get your gear set up, like, are you wearing the proper equipment? Maybe they have some extra stuff that you might not have that they borrow. So things like that. They help you on the surface in the event that you're having any issues or difficulty. They might help you, again, put your gear together, help you get your gear on in certain dive settings. It's not easy. There's nothing there to help you do stuff. So your dive buddy's there for you and you're there for them. Again, but both before and after the dive, so they can help you get your gear on and help you get your gear off. And then you continue to do these buddy checks. So once you get like into the water, they'll do like an air bubble check to make sure that your cylinder isn't leaking or none of your regulators are leaking. And then also just help you under the water. Sometimes you'll get all into something and you might not be streamlined, or, maybe something fell out. They'll help you streamline and so forth, and you help with them. And you stay close to them while you're under the water. Obviously, this is for safety reasons. So that you guys can have each other's back, and of course, in the event of an air sharing emergency.
Ximena, how close should they stay underwater?
Well, I was going to ask them that.
Okay, ask them that.
Yeah. How close should you be to your buddy?
About as
Probably
close as
like
you can feed them and not lose them.
Say again.
Just enough
Maddie.
just to make sure that they're, oh, sorry.
I was gonna say like 5 to 10 feet of each other, so you can stay a close enough distance.
And
you're
Will,
both right. You're both right.
Yeah. I was gonna say, so in essence, the textbooks and things usually say that if you were to reach out each other's arms, that you will be able to touch each other.
And-
However, this will vary. Oh, sorry.
Let me just
Go
say
ahead.
that the real answer is close enough to render assistance. And so
Yeah.
in a let's say a dive where there is not great visibility, you'll actually want to be in touch contact with the person. And then when you go on your
Mhm.
trip to the Caribbean and there's endless visibility, 5 to 10 feet is probably, more than enough. You might even be able to be a
Mhm.
little bit further apart, so that if your buddy needed assistance, you would see them and be able to swim to them and render assistance.
Yeah, and the more comfortable you get, more so with your dive buddy, because even if you're comfortable, if this isn't the same person you dive with regularly, this is something you guys probably want to discuss on the surface before you get under the water and somebody's confused. If you're not constantly diving with this person, these are things that you should talk about, just so that your dive buddy isn't like angry with you at the end. Like, why were you so far? And you're like, this is normal for me. Talk about it. But in essence, it's going to vary based upon your diving abilities, who you're diving with, and the circumstances of your diving, clarity of the water and sorts. So things that your buddy, you're going to check. Again, make sure that your air is on. So again, we put all this gear on, we put all these things on. I've seen this happen countless times in the many diving classes that I've been in, where somebody forgot to turn their air on. So this is something that you would do for your buddy and your buddy would do for you. Just checking to make sure it's on. If it's not on, turn it on, let them know, don't make a big deal out of it. They're checking your PSI. So both of you want to know what each of your PSI is, so that you have a good understanding of how much diving you're going to be doing. Your cylinder band is tight. I've seen this so many times too. And as we know, given what we know about physics, that there's variations that can occur. You want to make sure this band is tight, because sometimes the tank or the cylinder, will wiggle loose and things like that. So you want to make sure that band is really tight. Help your buddy out, so when you're not walking out to your dive site, that your cylinder isn't falling down. That your hoses are in the correct places. And this sounds like probably a lot right now, but your octopus is supposed to be under your arm, your regulator is supposed to be over your arm, just making sure everything's in place and streamlined. That your BC power inflator, they're going to double check and make sure that it's attached correctly, and that you can actually add air and dump air from your BC, and that your weight system is correct. And you want to ask each other, how are you feeling? Do you feel good? And as you get to know someone, or if you're not super comfortable with someone and you feel like they're off, maybe that's something that you need to discuss and ask them, because it might be something regular and it might not be, and you might not want to go on that dive, but you want to ask them how they're feeling, both physically and emotionally.
And Ximena, maybe ask them
Yes.
if they know what a full cylinder, what PSI is a full cylinder.
Oh, okay. What PSI is a full cylinder?
Isn't it 130 PSI?
No. Will, did you have a?
I was about to say, isn't it 3,000?
Very good.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I
Very
was
good.
That's okay.
That's okay. I think what you're thinking of is like 120 is the amount of the ambient pressure that comes out for the appropriate amount from the pressure gauge to your breathing.
yeah, I think that's
So
what I was
that's probably what you were thinking. It's about 120, 130.
Yeah.
So like we discussed, staying close to your buddy, you want to be close enough to render assistance. This is going to vary. Again, you have to be able to see that person so they can tell you if they're out of air or if there's an emergency or situation going on. Like we mentioned, you want to be closer in turbid or deep dives or low visibility dives, and within touch distance if you're doing like some more restrictive training or more challenging dives. So learn to keep track of your buddy. Again, if you can dive with the same groups of people, that's ideal because you get really comfortable and then you can start communicating more under the water. But in the event that doesn't happen, just think of all the things that you would want to know, like try to talk about anything you can on the surface so it's not confusing under the water. So positioning of your buddy, this is going to vary depending on the circumstances. But again, this is something you want to talk about because if this is not someone that you know and you're comfortable with, like some people can get mad. They can be upset that they feel too far from them or you weren't watching them or you were off doing something. Like you can talk about that with this person, especially, you know, if you're nervous, this is your first dive, you can say, hey, I've never been down here. I'm a little nervous. Like, can you make sure you're checking up on me and ask them that too. So again, it just really is important to communicate before getting to a place where you can't communicate under the water. And whatever you agree upon, maintain that position, you know, because you wouldn't want someone to agree to be next to you when you're concerned and then not be there. Side by side is best. You know, this again is going to vary as you dive more and depending on the conditions, you might be side by side. You know, they say not to be one person in front of the other. And this is because if the person behind is having an emergency and they can't reach you, like they have to hope that you're going to turn around and look at them. So ideally you want to be, you know, in a place where you can have your dive buddy in your peripheral or that you are checking on them in a consistent fashion. And like I said, one behind the other least desirable because if your buddy behind you is having an emergency, that's not going to work. But in certain situations like caverns, you would do this, but this is where you would be in touching proximity.
Well, we're not going to dive caverns in this, but I'll tell
Right.
you something that would be good for open water divers would be to keep in mind if they go to somewhere like the Bahamas where there's wall diving. So with wall diving, then they wouldn't want to be side by side because the person on the outside wouldn't ever get to see all the cool stuff. And so normally on a wall dive, like in the Bahamas, you're going to have one person in front and on the way out, and then the other person in front on the way back so that you each get a chance to lead the dive.
Yeah, so all this is going to vary. It's going to depend on where you are. But, you know, just kind of common sense. Not everyone has that. I don't know. Know your dive plan. So super important. We pushed this on you guys last time. Everybody should know the general direction of the dive. So is this a drift dive where you're dropping down and you're pretty much going in one area? You know, are we going to Cherokee Sink and we're going to say, hey, we're going to drop down and we're going to stay along the limestone walls because that's really, really cool? Or, you know, are we going to practice our compass? Like you want to talk about that and have an idea of where you're going and what you're doing. Time and depth plan, again, super duper important. Why? Because we don't want decompression sickness. So, you know, everybody needs to have a time telling device and a depth gauge, and everybody needs to follow what was decided upon. Planned activities. So are we just going to go around, like I said, if you're going to Cherokee, are we going to decide to circle around the sink one time? Are we going to try to go out to the mill? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to see? You want to talk about that stuff so nobody's confused as to what's going on. And again, if somebody wants to do something different, you guys have to agree on that, agree if changes are made. And look for your buddy, you know, often, you know, not where you're not having a good time and you're missing out, but often enough where you would feel comfortable and they're comfortable too. And you do this every minute, at least. Depending on in other areas, you do it more, but you want to have a good peripheral or a good view of your dive buddy and where they're at. So if you have a lost buddy, does anyone know what you do if you or your buddy's lost? What, or specifically, what's the amount of time that you would wait before you surface if you have a lost buddy?
Maybe like a minute
Yeah.
at most.
Perfect.
Just
Yep,
because like
that's
if I
right.
run out of oxygen, it's kind of a timed thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's 1 minute. So if you're separated, the first thing you do is look around, try to see them. You know, that's hopefully they're somewhere that you can see, and it was just a little bit of a confusion. So, you know, take some time, look around, you know, maybe they're behind something. If there's things like that, look around. No more than a minute though. Use noise signals available. So some people have sort of like a latch looking metal thing and they can bang it on their cylinders. So, you know, this is something you want to talk about. Hey, I have this. If I don't see you, I'm going to bang this. So if you hear this noise, please come find me because I don't know where you are. You can talk about that stuff on the surface. If visibility is bad, ascend a little and look for bubbles. So in bad visibility, oftentimes it's harder to see a person moving around than it is to see bubbles. So ascend a little bit and circle, you know, your body and look for bubbles, you know, because once you start diving, you'll notice it's quite a bit of bubbles. So, you know, it's easier to see. And then do not wait any more than a minute. After a minute, if you cannot locate this person, ascend to the surface. Ascend in a regular ascent. Don't shoot up to the surface looking for your buddy and put yourself at risk, you know. Ascend in your normal ascent rate. And as you're doing so, you know, you can continue to look around, do your safety stop, look around, and then come up and work on that. So buddy diving. The importance of buddy diving, it's all about sharing an activity. It's why it's called buddy, like a friend diving. It's all about safety. So although your buddy is there with you to have fun and share this wonderful experience under the water, the most important part is for you to be having tabs on someone that's also having tabs on you. Everyone wants to have a good time, and we do that by living and being safe. So module 3 summary went over basic equipment, exposure suits, weighting systems, buoyancy compensators, cylinders and valves, regulators, the different types of various accessories and specialized equipment we might use, and why we dive with a buddy. Before we move on, does anyone have any questions? Okay. So we'll get into module 4, some of the skills we need. So we're going to talk real quick about different water entries, the different scuba skills, like the importance of managing excess stress, the importance of managing physical problems, touching on managing emergencies, and introduction just briefly into dive tables because we'll get way more into them later on. So some of the different water entries that you guys are going to learn about is going to be how to enter from the shoreline, how to enter from the surf, and then how to enter from a boat. And also I don't know if we're gonna dive there, but sort of like in the pool, do we do that with them? Like if we go to the platforms where they would go in, or we're not doing that, like a roll or anything?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Oh, I know Jacob talked about it the other day, so I was like, oh, I forgot about that one. It's not on there. It's okay. We'll talk about it later. So in the short, can anyone tell me what's the proper way? Like you kind of see it here, but what would be, no?
Well,
Okay.
actually, Ximena, the way that's being shown here is what's shown in the textbook. And it's not what we recommend in Florida. And so in California and places where there's really big waves, this is how you enter on shore. You enter backward with the regulator in your mouth, wearing your fins. But if you guys know anything about our sand in the Gulf of Mexico, you would lose your fins. This would be really foolish.
Yes.
So what we actually do is we walk forward carrying our fins with our snorkels, not our regulators in our mouth, so that we save air. And then if a breaker comes, we turn our backs, we let it hit our backs, and then we continue forward till we pass the breakers. We put our fins on, we switch from snorkel to regulator. We do this at places like the jetties in Panama City. If you've ever been to St. Andrews State Park, it's really fun. And you don't want to waste all your air just, while you're standing up walking into the ocean. So.
Yeah, so I was going to touch on that a little bit, but thank you. So, and then if you are on a boat, you do these roll-in dives or the like the leap entry dive, the push-off entry dive.
Wait, go back.
Sorry,
So
my brain just.
Yeah, it's okay. So we want to make sure they have the proper terms. So the diver on the left is doing a back roll entry, and that's the most common kind of entry you're going to do from a small private boat. And then the diver on the right is doing a giant stride entry. And 99% of the places you go, this is the kind of entry you're going to do. We'll be practicing this in the pool. Giant stride entry.
Giant stride, yes. I don't know why I was like total brain fart. I was thinking like giant leap, and I'm like, that's not right.
Giant stride. I know you know it because everyone does it.
So and Gabrielle mentioned this surface snorkeling to the dive site, where she mentioned using your snorkel. So you want to do this? Can anyone tell me why we would use our snorkel to where we're going before we drop?
Maybe look at the area and try to see what there is.
Maddie got it. I mean, yes, it's good to see where you're going, but you could do that with a regulator in your mouth because you'd be swimming anyways, right? Because it's easier to swim than it is to try to paddle out to somewhere. But you'd use this to conserve your air, right? Because we don't want to use our cylinder while we're at the surface. We want to try to devote the most of that we can to seeing things under the water. So we'll use our snorkel to conserve our air in our cylinders. And then once we get to where we're actually going to drop, we would go ahead and switch to our regulators when we're ready to descend. So 3 important rules: equalize early and often. I cannot stress this enough. For me, at least, I have like sinus issues. I don't really have a lot of ear problems. I fly a lot, but I do get that. And I would just say that if ever I wait if I'm like doing stuff or task loaded and I wait until like my ear is like just a little bit pressure and I do it, then I have more problems or more, I don't want to say problems, because if you have a problem, stop, but more difficulty clearing, and I feel more pressure than I would normally if I just start like almost right when I'm about to go in. If I start clearing early and often, like immediately almost at surface, and as I go down, I do it like a whole lot during that first 33 feet. Does anyone remember why? What happens between surface and 30?
Isn't it the most pressure?
Yeah, exactly. So that's like the largest pressure shift happens between 0 and 33 feet. And so I find that when I start doing it at surface, like immediately I just picture my nose as I'm dropping and boop, 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 do it. I have such a much better dive and I don't have like any kind of funny hearing things afterwards. Again, super important. Always breathe, never hold your breath, and exhale continuously if your regulator is out of your mouth. So I know we talk about like constantly breathing when your regulator is in. If ever when we're doing drills and things like that and you're having to move them out of your mouth or for whatever reason, obviously you can't breathe in at that point, but you want to go ahead and blow out like a small stream of air too, because the same thing is happening to your lungs regardless of if it's your regulator in your mouth or not. Correct weighting is super important. If you don't have enough, you aren't going to go down. And if you have too much, just in order to get down, and you just did that because you're nervous and you're having a hard time, relaxing to get down, it's going to, you're not going to be streamlined. You're not going to get proper buoyancy, and it's also gonna make you heavier, which, as we know, then just makes you utilize your air faster. So no air in the BC, floating above mast. I don't know what that means. No air in the BC. If you have correct weight, you're going to dump all the air out of your BC, and you should then begin to descend. And I guess floating above mass. Okay, I understand. Sorry. So the no air in the BC. So you're going to have to dump out the air from your BC through your dump valve, right? However, I've seen people do this underwater too. They'll try to dump the air out, but they're either like, they're underweighted, and so, or they think they're underweighted, but there's really just air in there. But the air is, like if you try, if you're this way and the dump valve is here and the air is back here in your BC, how is it going to get to here, right? Does that make sense? So you want to make sure that you're sort of upright, because the air has to be able to go to the exit point, right? So you want to make sure that when you're dumping, you're straight up, and then if you're underwater and you need to dump some more, kind of lean up a little bit. And then in other cases, you would descend on a line. So you'd still have to dump any of the air you had in your BC that you might have utilized to get to where you're going to dive, dump it all out, and you would descend down from your line. And if you're at the correct weight and you're not nervous and you're not, breathing in a stressed way, you should just go ahead and start descending. Again, clear your ears early and often. And then at depth, just because like we talked about with dive physics, once you get past those certain pressure points and volume and pressure changes, you are actually going to be heavier than what you were at the surface. So you'll find, even if you have a little bit of trouble sinking or, descending when you're higher up, once you get down, you'll notice yourself to start actually sinking. And so at that point, you're going to have to add a little bit of air, inflate your BC a little bit to become neutrally buoyant. And you want to do this really slowly, obviously, because sometimes if you start pressing that button because, oh no, I'm sinking super quick and I'm just going to add, then you're going to start, shooting up too quickly. So you're just getting, you're just getting to that place where with your continuous breathing at a normal rate, and the proper air in there, that's where you'll find yourself right at your streamline position. So again, diver trim and position. So this is in reference to your buoyancy, right? So super important to have good trim, super important to be in the proper position. Not only is this good because when you're doing this, you are going to be more relaxed, you're going to, not use your air in your cylinder more quickly. You're also going to not affect the things that are around you, either kicking up silt, hitting corals or different things, and also accidentally kicking the people that are around you, which happens a lot. So too light or too heavy? Can somebody tell me what the person with their feet up in the air, are they too light or too heavy?
They are too
heavy?
heavy.
Oh,
Yeah,
light,
no, so
sorry.
yeah, so they're too light. So you'll find this, or you'll feel this when you're learning how to get your buoyancy. When you're too light, you're like, it's almost like somebody picking your legs up slowly behind you. And it's not a good time. You're going to be constantly fidgeting, fighting to try to stay down. When you're too heavy, you're going to be head down. So that's like, you're going to have to be adding air to your BC and to your, and then that's just so much air in your BC, which of course makes you more dense, which makes it harder for you to move around. Not that you necessarily feel it, but it's going to cause you to use your cylinder, the air in your cylinder faster. So learning to streamline doesn't just have to do with your buoyancy. It also has to do with streamlining your gear. And again, this is important. One, your gear is expensive. Two, you're going to possibly cause yourself entanglement issues. And three, it's just, basically in the way, and it's causing more friction with your diving, and you can damage sea life and things like that too. or aquatic life. So hanging gauge and octopus, again, this is something that your dive buddy is for. Like sometimes these things will come unconnected. That's something you want to monitor for on your dive buddy. So if, you know, sometimes the person, the diver themselves can't see this happening. So you just go up gently, hey, say, hey, look, and then boop, click it back on for them. And the same with your octopus. They can sometimes fall out. It's not like somebody's purposely trying to be terrible. You know, you just go ahead and put it back on. And again, dragging octopus on the bottom. So some of the places that we will dive, for example, at Big Blue, you do not want to do this. There's silt on the bottom. Once you kick it up, oh gosh, it is going to change the whole diving experience. And also there are caves down there and there's sometimes cave divers. So we just want to be really courteous of the other divers around us. And we also want to enjoy our diving experience. So you don't want anything that's going to, you know, mess with anything that's around for safety reasons and also just for the animals and different things. So during ascent, so check your gauges. This is something that you're going to work with your buddy as well. You're going to be talking about your PSI randomly, and we're going to show you how to do that later on with some hand signals and things. But you're going to ask, you're going to, you know, not constantly where it's not enjoying your dive, but you'll learn this as you are diving more and more, how often you're going to start checking your PSI and make sure you're at an appropriate amount of air left over, and you're going to ask your buddy the same thing. So once you get to you know, the air that you all discussed ascending with based upon your dive your air consumption rates, you're going to begin your safe ascent. So you never want to get too low on air where you can't do a safe ascent. And using a line is better. Yeah, using a line, you know, can be better because it's more controlled, of course, you know, and especially when you're a new diver in areas where currents and things like that, it will help you. So that it is ideal, but that doesn't mean that you aren't going to be able to do that without your line either. Does anyone know the rate of ascent that you should do? It's very slow.
About 10 feet a minute.
Do you have a guess, Maddie?
Oh, not sure.
Hint, it's slower than that.
Even slower than 10 feet a minute.
So 5 feet a minute?
No, I'm sorry. I got my math wrong.
I was like,
I totally got
no.
my math wrong. It's faster than that.
It's faster.
But you know
than
what? You
that.
can't
Thank
go wrong with
you.
10 feet a minute. It wouldn't be harmful to go too
Yeah.
slow.
It's in 15 standard, but we're going to be going at 10.
It's 30.
It's 30.
It's-
Yeah. So it's
Sorry.
Sorry about that. No, that
No.
was my fault totally, but it's hand over hand like that. If you had a
yeah. Yeah. So if you had a line, you'd go hand over hand, not running up it like regular hand over hand. And if you don't, you know, you're going to kind of be looking at your depth gauge as you're doing it, but it's in essence, it's pretty slow. And again, we want to do this super important, you know, Henry, the soda, you don't want to pop that top off with a shaken bottle. You want to let that little, you know, that bottle fizz out slow. And that's why, right? So we're letting our bodies regulate the nitrogen that we've been consuming. So buddy plan, advantages of a buddy. First of all, never dive without a buddy. Just don't do it. The advantages is you live and it's more safe. So you're sharing your safety. You don't have to, well, you should try to remember everything, but we are humans, so we don't remember everything. So you're sharing that safety with someone else. So I might remember some things you don't remember and vice versa. Planning your dive. This is going to always help you to be conservative with your dive planning, right? Like, if it's just you, you might be like, oh, I'm going to be a little extra. But if it's somebody else's life on your hands, hopefully you're going to be safer, even though you're going to be safe all the time. And then you're just, again, your depth time, your depth, your time, your turnaround time. Turnaround time. Can somebody tell me what that is? So turnaround time is the time that you are going to, you know, decide. It's not just what you decided depending on your level of expertise, and there's certain limits that you do it at, but it's the time that you and your buddy decide. Like, we are not going to get below, you know, whatever, depending on where you are, like 800 PSI, you know, they say deck time is 500 PSI, which means you want to be at the surface with nothing less than 500 PSI. So this is something that you and your dive buddy will talk about. Maybe it's because of their air consumption rate or whatever, but you want to make sure that you have enough time to, hand over hand at the 30 feet per minute and be able to safety stop without running out of air. So you'll plan this turnaround time. And what to see in hand signals. So things that you might see, this is part of your dive planning. Like you want to look up different locations. So if we're going to Cherokee Sing, I'm like, hey, we're going to see an octopus. It's not going to happen. But you'd be like, hey, let's keep an eye out for eels. At Big Blue, there's the albino crayfish and things like that. Hey, let's try to look for these things. And it's like, hey, I really want to see this. So if you see one, like, let's talk about a hand signal that we're going to do to see it. So there's sort of universal hand signals. And then there's some that are like for animals, obviously shark, pretty universal, but then there's some that you can just decide amongst yourselves how they're going to be. These are things you want to talk about. And of course, you need to always remember what to do if you become separated. And as Will very intelligently told us, it's 1 minute and then you come up. So I think hand signals is my last one. Okay, hand signals, just wanted to make sure. Can anyone tell me okay under the water?
No. You're gonna demonstrate and you're gonna have them do
want,
this.
okay.
And then
I
you're
didn't know
gonna
if
show
there's
them
some
the
very
images.
practice.
They don't know these
Okay,
yet,
okay.
okay? So you're gonna go through each of them and then you're gonna show them the pictures and have them tell you, okay?
Okay. So okay under the water, this used to be an old okay thing, and I think it kind of changed, but this is okay under the water. Okay, so can you guys do this for me?
And this hasn't
Okay.
changed since the beginning of diving.
Oh, and I'm sorry, on land, I meant like back when I was young, people would be like, okay, and then it went to this, but we'll talk
okay.
about that later. I didn't mean for diving. Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay for diving under the water is this. And by the way, this is the question. This isn't just like if I'm diving with you and I'm your dive buddy and I'm like, hey, you're like, oh, she's okay. That's cool. No. I'm asking you and you have to respond, right? Or I'm going to just keep doing it to you and you're going to be like, what is wrong with this lady? If anybody does this to you, it's a question. So if I say, okay, you have to okay back to me if you're okay. If you're not okay, let me know. Because if I see my dive buddy and they're doing something, I'm like, okay. If they don't respond and they're still doing something weird, I'm gonna be like, does this person have nitrogen narcosis? I don't know what's wrong with them. So again, it's a question, and you can the same with you and your dive buddy. If you ask them okay, they need to respond with okay. So okay on the surface. So okay on the surface can be this and really clear, but in some cases that's not really obvious, especially if there's waves and things like that. So we just do this instead, right?
And actually,
okay.
just to correct you, Ximena, we never do this at the surface. We don't, that's not it. So we just do this. So go ahead and practice that. You put your fist on your head, or you can do ballerina style if you prefer with the pointed fingers, but go ahead and everyone practice that.
Yeah. So okay on the surface.
Well, let's see you do it. Good.
So anytime, that you get into the water with any of the entries we discussed, oftentimes the person who's still on the surface, they'll ask you and then you'll say, okay. And that's just to make sure that you got into the water safely and you're ready to descend. So ear problems. So problems is this, right? And then ear would be pointing to your ear. So you could also do like this, but basically this is problem, and then you're going to point to the thing that's the problem. So in this case, it's ear problem. So if everybody could do that, it's kind of like wavy, like, not really great ear, right? So hold this depth is like this. So hold this depth.
It can be one hand or two.
Yeah. And then also when you're doing your safety stop, if somebody is kind of like the one who's more controlling the depth, you could do your safety stop, and sometimes we do like this. So it's like 3 minute safety stop, right? Because you're going to stop for 3 minutes at 15 feet.
And just so you know, this is not universal. So what I do is I just do one hand. I go 3 minutes, hold this depth. 3 minutes, hold this depth. So some people use two hands and do that, but I just do this. So it's not universal, but just so you know, this generally is hold this depth.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go.
And yeah, so buddy up is It's like your index fingers and tapping them together, right? So if you see Gabrielle or I or anybody else, any dive master that you're with or instructor, we do this. That means either we're about to start going somewhere or they notice that you're not really paying attention to your buddy or vice versa. But this means to go ahead and buddy up, okay? So low on air, you are always going to be checking your PSI. So this isn't something that should happen. But if you are low on air, it's sort of like a hand to your lungs, like a fist, right, to your lungs. So low on air.
And we actually have never seen this anywhere except for in the Georgia Aquarium. It's the only place I've ever seen them use this hand signal. It's very unusual. We'd rather know how much PSI you have. We'd rather,
Yeah.
you know, for you, 1,000 PSI might be low on air. For me, you know, 500, 300. Just tell us how much PSI you have.
Yeah. So out of air, super important, right? Because this one we need to know. So it's like this, right? Like death. Ah, out of air.
Will, let's see it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. We're gonna make you do it because you have to do it again later too. So up and ascend, which is why we don't use this for I'm doing okay, right? So up or ascend. So if somebody does this to you, it's because they want to go up, and that could either mean up all the way or we need to go up a little bit. So these are things you need to communicate. And then the opposite of that is to descend, right? So sometimes if you're doing like some drills at a certain level, then we'll be like, okay, great. Now let's go ahead and descend.
Well, and we also do this anytime we descend. Anytime we do this, right? Right before we just go down, we say, let's go diving.
Yeah, let's descend. Yeah. Help is help. I need help. You'll usually notice because people will be like, hey, help me. And then marine life. So these, again, sometimes will vary, but shark, right? Turtle, let's say, right? Oh, this guy, yeah. Eel can be like this, right? Like little snaky guy. And then for your gauge, so sometimes we'll tap at the gauge, but it's this, right? That's what we have. Yeah. So that would mean to tell me what, if I do this to you, that means I want you to tell me how much PSI you have, right?
So
How
if you
much
have a
air you
full
have left
cylinder
in
right
you.
now, let's say you have your aluminum 80 cylinder and you have 3,000 PSI in it, show us with your hands, what would 3,000
Yeah.
PSI look like? It'd be
So,
3, 0, 0, 0.
yeah. So I was doing like, all right, tell me.
Yeah, so PSI,
Yeah.
and then, so go ahead and practice doing that. So 3, 0, 0, 0. If you have 2,500, and people do it differently. Some do it on, you know, thousands is on one hand and hundreds is on, I don't do that. I just, you know, 2,500 and
Yeah.
1,000. Just be clear about your zeros. If I see you go 1 and 2 zeros, I'm going to be like, wait, what? So, okay. All right, now you're going to have them tell you.
Okay, so what is this?
That means okay on the surface.
That's right. What is
Okay.
this?
That's okay underwater.
What about this one? It's hard to see, but they're, yes.
Are they waiting for help? Okay.
Okay, so what's this one? She's
Oh,
not
they're
doing the
pointing at
first
their
part.
ear problems.
Right. So what's this one?
Hold this step.
Very good. So what's this
Buddy.
one?
Buddy up.
Yep, buddy up.
Low on
Okay,
air.
so this one is, yeah, low on air, correct. Yeah,
Out of
this
air.
one.
You're out of air. Upper ascend.
Up.
That's right. Okay, all right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ximena. Any questions so far?
Nope.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen then. Hang on. There we are. So with ascending, it's a decision to end a dive. And just like Ximena said with many of our hand signals, we exchange them as a question and an answer. So one buddy will typically say, I want to go up. And then the other one has to say, okay, we're going up. You need to acknowledge with answering it. If somebody says this and it's too early, you might want to ask them like, what's going on? They might tell you there's a problem. But you do need to exchange hand signals. You're going to check your gauge before you ascend. That way, let's say that maybe you haven't paid attention to your gauge. It'd be a good time to let them know that you're running a little low. Like maybe you tell them, oops, I'm already at 500 PSI. Let's stay really close together. You're going to begin your ascent. You're going to let air out of your BC. Which law is this that Ximena mentioned earlier? When you go at depth, you're going to feel heavier and you're going to need to add air to your BC. When you come up, you're going to need to take a little air out of your BC. Which law is that?
Is that Boyle's law?
Very good. Boyle's law. You're going to keep an eye on your buddy. The easiest places to lose your buddy are when you're descending and when you're ascending. And when you're ascending, you're typically turning, looking around, you're making sure there's no boat traffic, no marine life you're going to bump into and that kind of thing. You're going to do your safety stop at what depth and for how long?
At
Is it 33 feet?
sure.
No, that's 1 atmosphere, absolute.
Uh,
So there is a 3 in it. For how long?
After 3 minutes.
3 minutes for 3 minutes, and it's at 15 feet, and it's actually between 15 and 20. So if you're diving on a boat, not everyone's going to be exactly at 15. So you're going to put one hand on and let the next person put their hand below you and so on. So, and then you're going to surface. And what are you going to do when you surface?
you're gonna clear your ears the entire time.
Well, typically clearing your ears is important, mainly when you're descending. So you're going to clear it at the surface before you descend and as you descend. You don't normally need to clear as much when you ascend, especially after you're at the surface. But you are going to give an okay sign on the top of your head, right? And then you're going to inflate your BC and you're going to switch to snorkel. And all this stuff about gear is going to make a lot more sense when we're by the pool and we actually have the gear in our hands. Now, I know right now it feels a little foreign. That's okay. When you leave the water, this picture isn't great because normally what we do is we have one fin on each hand and we're going to keep our mask, especially like this person is going up a ladder on a boat. So you're going to make sure that your regulator or your snorkel stays in your mouth and your mask stays on your face. It's really dangerous to take them off but when you go up a ladder because you could fall back in. You also want to make sure that if you're the person behind this person, that you're not directly under them in case they fall back in because they could end up hurting you. So there are other stressors that can happen as well. You might have equipment issues. Things are going to be heavy. The first time you wear a wetsuit, have you guys worn wetsuits before?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've worn them, I think, like once.
Okay. So, they don't really feel super comfortable, especially if you've ever been in cold water where you're wearing a thicker full wetsuit. It's going to feel more confining the first time you wear one when you're scuba diving. When people are stressed out, they tend to lose things too. They tend to misplace things. There might be malfunctions. They're generally not going to be malfunctions with anything of mine that you're using. But do a buddy check, as Ximena mentioned, before you dive. And then, of course, if you have your own gear, you always want to make sure you maintain your equipment. You are going to feel task loaded on your first dives. Here's what normally happens. The pool sessions, you're going to feel pretty good. The first session, you're going to be like, wow, this is intense. The second session, you're going to gain confidence with your pool session skills. And you're going to be like, this is going to be so easy. And then the first time you go diving, you're going to see that 45 feet deep and you're going to be like, whoa, that looks so much deeper. And you're going to hold air in your lungs and we're going to have to try to get you to relax. So I'm going to hold your hands. I'm going to try to help you with your breathing so that you don't feel really, really stressed. But you are going to be task loaded on your first dives. We're going to be doing a lot of skills. You want to relax and think things through. Now, the only time generally there's going to be low visibility is Ximena mentioned, like when we go to Big Blue, it's not very forgiving if you don't have good form and trim. And so if you're not neutrally buoyant in the water and you're doing flutter kicks instead of frog kicks, you're going to cause bad visibility. And we don't want to do that. Low visibility is not fun. When we dive at Cherokee Sink, we can generally expect that the visibility is not going to be as good, but that'll be your second set of dives and it should be a little easier for you to handle. Physical threats may or may not be real. I love sharks, for example, and I remember when I first started diving, I was so scared of sharks. And then the first time I saw a shark when I was diving, my heart just pounded out of my chest, and the shark saw me and probably felt the same way about me and was like, ah, human. And it swam away as fast as it could. And then this would happen and I would be like, gosh, I really wish I could see a shark more. And then I went diving and I saw a shark sleeping and I just kind of swam around it. I was like, this is the coolest thing. Like I can actually observe it. Now I actually go diving with sharks all the time, you know, because I want to, because I feel like they are misunderstood creatures. I like to call them the pit bulls of the ocean. And speaking of dogs, that's my dog just telling me he wants to go outside. But they're actually very curious. And if you go to my YouTube channel and Google like epic, just do the word, search for the word epic on my YouTube channel. You'll see me diving with sharks and how cool they are. So, but anyway, you might feel threatened when we go diving at Big Blue, for example. Have you been on the Westchester River before?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. Well, there are alligators as we're paddling out, and some people are afraid. I know, I just saw Maddie's eyes get big. There are alligators as we're paddling out, but when we go diving, you're not going to be diving with alligators, don't worry. But we may see some along the way. And I just want you to know that it's okay for you to feel afraid. We are not going to be diving with them. But I have had people, you know, who have this huge fear and they're like terrified, and then they start diving and then they're like, okay, it's not so bad. Finn, now is not the right time to ask to go out. So the biggest threat though is ego. There are people out there who really start to get too confident too soon with their diving, and they dive farther than their abilities. Do not let your ego ever cloud your best judgment. I'm always doing contingency plans. A great thing about having a dive buddy is that you can just sit there with your dive buddy at times and go, hey, let's practice some drills while we're diving. Let's practice out of air drills. Let's practice whatever. And that to me is really helpful. So Will, your mom had said that you were Googling me. So you'll see there's a lot of cool stuff, especially epic sharks, Gabrielle, you'll find it. But get training for the type of diving you want to do. You guys are just starting out. You're young, you know, you're going to do open water. And then as you progress, like Jacob now, he's really getting into cave diving. And so you want to get a lot of dive experience under your belt before you progress your diving. There are a lot of responses to increased stress. Your heart rate will increase, your respiration will increase. You will have something called perceptual narrowing. Do you know what that is?
Almost like tunnel vision, but it's just 'cause you're kind of
Yes.
stressed out. You know, you're focusing on maybe one or two specific things out of fear almost.
Exactly. And you're so focused on whatever it is that you're afraid of that you're forgetting the most basic thing, like breathing. And the biggest danger of failure to exhale if you don't solve the problem. So which of these two divers is more stressed, do you think?
I'd assume the one on the left who's breathing a lot more.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it is, you know, have either of you experienced any kind of fear or panic in your lives?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things
You
I've
have. And
experienced.
so one thing about scuba is that it's going to teach you how to manage that in a healthy way. And here's what I think. When you learn to manage it underwater, it really helps you on land with other things. So to me, one of the great things about scuba diving is it's about getting out of your comfort zone. It's about overcoming fears, doing things you never thought was possible. And when you do that, you're going to gain confidence that's going to help you not just in the water, but out of the water. So Jacob's going to continue talking about stress. Any questions with what I covered? All right, great.
Nope.
Thank you. Jacob, unmute yourself, please.
Pretty sure I am.
Okay, then talk.
I think. Can you hear me or?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So, things being slow. Really one problem, little problems that are not solved, like the bigger problems. So if you're stressed over, say your fin came off and it just starts really getting to you, it will kind of eat at you, and then you'll start struggling and start panicking or something. Like if you don't clear your ears and you continue going down thinking you can just go for it, the pain will eventually put you into fight or flight. So when it leads to bigger problems, it can overwhelm you. Panic can set in, and panic is the point where all logic and mental control is just completely lost. And like I said, only fight or flight remains. Fight or flight meaning you're not going to be able to think straight. You're just going to, like, I've witnessed a panic diver and they completely ripped off their mask, and one of their fins even came off. So it's pretty bad, and the best way to keep anyone from panicking is to prevent it from happening in the first place. So panic is not an option. You want to remain calm at all times, no matter the situation, because that's going to allow you to deal with that situation a lot faster. So prevention, plan your dive and dive your plan. Sometimes things can go astray and then the plan's no longer there, then you should probably end the dive. So you have a responsibility to make sure you yourself are good to go and all right. Also check on your buddy, make sure they're okay. And then also other divers, always keep awareness of what's going on around you at all times if you can. And non-diving public, like we'll see free divers come down. They'll be holding their breath and then they'll come down to us sometimes, or just random swimmers. So you do need a bit of fitness to dive, though it's a little less physical than on the surface. You're burning a lot of calories scuba diving, but it's a little, you're not kicking as often unless you're in like current or something. A lot of it is mental. You gotta know and think and everything of what's going on and what you need to keep track of and your buddies and everything. So what we believe is 40% physical, 60% mental. So when all else fails, you need to stop, breathe, think, breathe, and react. This can be used in several situations. So you want to stop what you're doing, take a full breathing cycle, and then think about what you need to do. Take another full breathing cycle, and then take action by reacting to the stressor, such as if you're entangled, sometimes there is fishing line that's just been cut and it's in the grass or something, like a big blue Gabrielle that no one noticed, and you got a little bit on it. Old monofilament, I don't know if you remember that. But you react to the stressor, deal with it, and then continue going.
I mean, let me just cut in there. There's going to be situations where there's monofilament that you don't see. It happens anywhere there are people where they fish. So if you're at a reef somewhere, sadly, there are going to be situations where you're going to see monofilament, and you're going to maybe even not see it because it's not always easy to see. It's clear. And you may get entangled with it. And the biggest thing is just to relax and get it. Now, we do carry knives or scissors often to help cut that. And I've seen firsthand, I've actually rescued more fish than divers from cut monofilament line where, you know, the fisher, the person who was fishing unfortunately snapped their line and something was hanging on on a hook down there. And, you know, so I've helped save some critters too, but it happens to the more you dive, it's going to happen.
And sometimes it can be as simple as not noticing a like a flag and float, which has a line on it, and just not noticing it, and it gets caught on your fin or something. So reaction, solve it underwater if possible. If not, in the dive, go to the surface and fix the problem. Still doing your safety stop and everything. Just being safe. Board or cancel the dive, like I was saying. Divers should respect each other's decisions. So if you're diving with your buddy and it's just you and your buddy, and they decide to thumb the dive, then respect what they say or what they decided on and in the dive, and see if there's an issue that needs to be fixed. It's much easier than doing a rescue on like a panic diver or anything. So panic cycle, problem begins to occur. That leads to a stress increase. Diver in control. Would stress is recognized, stop, breathe, think, breathe, and react to the situation. And then problem will be solved. Diver without any control will typically have perceptual narrowing, skill changes, even more stress and panic as a result. So flight or fight. For your starve for air, you can actually build up CO2 if you are not breathing enough, skip breathing, and also doing some more physical work like swimming against current. So stop moving and just kind of breathe, slow, deep breaths, signal to your buddy that you've stopped to let them stay by you. You can also ascend to shallower water. So solving a leg cramp, if you're dehydrated, it can also cause leg cramps. So slow your pace. You can stretch at first sign. So there's two different ways. We'll talk about that more in the pool session. But one is you can do it yourself, and then the other one is with the help of a buddy. So if it's yourself, you pull on the top of the fin and pull back while trying to keep your leg straight, and that'll stretch out your calf. If you use a buddy for assistance, they can do it for you, and it's a little deeper, so it really helps a lot more.
And we'll practice this in the swimming pool as well, because it's pretty common to get leg cramps.
Yeah. So managing physical problems. So entanglement, kind of talked about that. Self-assistance, it's usually best to like if it's a little too much for you to handle, then it's best to get your buddy to come do it for you. Buddy assistance. Streamlining, you want to make sure no gear is hanging down. You don't want to look like a Christmas tree underwater. Make sure your octo is tucked away where it needs to be. If you have a bunch of stuff all over you that's hanging around, that's just more drag, and also it's not as neat. So you'll move through the water easier when you streamline. So if you lose buoyancy, and this can be weight systems come off, if that happens, you dump air from your BC, flare during ascent. This is like making yourself larger to create more drag coming up. And breathe. If you breathe out, you can kind of slow down a little bit, but you should breathe normal breaths. So if your power inflator sticks open, you can hold the dump valve vent, or you can hold the vent button from the oral inflate on the power inflator. You can also disconnect the inflator hose from the system, and you'd be orally inflating and deflating at that point. So if the inflator doesn't work at all, then you'd be orally inflating, and you can drop your weights as a last resort, such as if you're overweighted, which none of you should be overweighted. So you shouldn't have to do that. Should just only have to orally inflate. So,
but real quick before you go on, I just wanted to say that because flaring sounds like this or something. If you are uncontrollably ascending, you want to flare up backwards, right? Because what you're trying to do is reduce the quickness that you are ascending, right? So if you happen to be like sort of shooting up to the surface or heading up to the surface and you can't stop yourself, it's not just flaring to make yourself, you're trying to keep yourself down while you're trying to think about like a solution to the problem. So I just wanted to make sure it was the opposite way, not just flaring. Sorry.
Yeah. So out of air emergencies, always make sure to check your gauge. It's best to check your gauge within every minute. That can vary per person, but no more than 4 minutes. So dependent would be octopus, buddy breathe, and a backup scuba unit. Independent would be emergency swimming ascent, positive buoyant ascent. Ooh, that's it. So
Were you
location.
gonna say a little bit about those?
Well, octopus breathe. Let's say your primary second stage stops functioning or something doesn't work. Maybe the seat just doesn't do its job. You can switch to your octopus. If you're completely out of air, then you can breathe from your buddy's octopus. And then if you have a backup scuba unit with redundancy, then you can switch to that and then get your buddy in the dive. Emergency swimming ascent is you breathe out as you go up, deflate your BC as you're going up, and you just swim straight to the surface while doing so. Only an emergency. Try your best not to do that, especially if you're on a long dive. So positive buoyant ascent is where you just ditch your weights and you're kind of uncontrolled buoyant, going up and still deflating your BC as you go up, just to kind of try to slow it a little bit.
And just to clarify, the difference between octopus breathing and buddy breathing is that most regulator sets, well, all that I have an octopus and a regulator. But you might go to a dive resort somewhere and rent gear and there is no octopus. So if somebody runs out of air, you're actually going to have to do share air. You're going to have to share air, and we'll practice that, and we'll practice both of those in the pool. You'll see that sharing air is a lot more challenging than just buddy breathing.
So in these images, 2 types of octopus are easily accessible in the left picture. This is showing a Air 2, which is the inflator is basically a second stage you can breathe from. And then the octopus, which is the yellow one on the left, is clipped higher up. We typically are going to be wearing some kind of silicone necklace that's going to keep it even higher up than that. And that's so if you need it, you can switch to it fairly quickly. If your buddy needs it, it's right there. You can just grab it and give it to your buddy. And they're yellow so that it's more easily seen. So diver signals low on air and then out of air. Buddy offers primary. So this is different than what they're going to teach you. Different people do different things. So always clarify if you're diving with someone you've never been diving with before, make sure to ask them like, how are they going to share air in an emergency situation? And go over that before going down. So for this class, you would be giving the octo and keeping the primary in your mouth. If you're doing share air, like she was saying, you'd pass the primary back and forth because you don't have an octo. So octopus, so you can see, again, this would be different for us. The octo hose is typically longer, so that would go to the buddy and the primary would stay with you. But this is just an example of 2 breathing off of the same system. And then you'd make it a controlled descent to end the dive and get out safely. So out of air buddy breathing, this is the sharing air passing back and forth. We typically do 2 breaths, give to the other person, 2 breaths, and back. So one is blowing bubbles, and you're always going to blow bubbles if the regulator is out of your mouth. Not big bubbles, you're not just fully exhaling, just little bubbles, so that if you do or are ascending, you're not overpressurizing your lungs. So they're just passing it back and forth as they ascend. So always exhale when the regulator's out of your mouth. And we'll be watching for that in the pool, even though we'll be shallow, not changing depth. You still should have that as a habit anytime the regulator is out of your mouth, to be blowing a little bit of air out of your mouth. So independent. Buddy is too far away. This would be in an emergency situation. As you can see in the left picture, the buddy is not paying any attention to them. So they're out of air and they can't signal to him. So they would begin an emergency swimming ascent. So this would be just swimming to the surface, and blowing out in the process as you go up. And as you go up, you're blowing out, because you are ascending, the breath, like, you don't just run out very quickly. As you're breathing out, the area is expanding, so you're just constantly breathing out, and it's just kind of weird. So exhale, continue breathing attempts. If the regulator is not working, like, you can try like pressing the purge or swapping to your octo. And if none of that works and your cylinder is completely out, just emergency ascend if the buddy's nowhere near you. So all else has failed. This is a positive uncontrolled ascent. So they're ditching their weights, which is what's keeping them down for the most part. And then they're just gonna start going up, and they'll be positively buoyant, so they can flare to slow themselves down, if they need to. But most aren't gonna do that in that situation. So which would you choose? If you had a choice, would you choose the octo sharing with your buddy, the share air swapping back and forth with the primary, emergency ascent, or uncontrolled emergency ascent? Like, which do you all think is a better choice?
I'd assume that octa would be best, considering the fact that you aren't, just trying to brush up there, which might give you bends.
So it is preferred, since both of you are breathing from an independent second stage regulator, but from the same pressure in the cylinder. So the deeper the dive, the faster you'll use the pressure in your cylinder. So the faster you'll breathe it out. Margin of safety, like they were saying earlier, you want to be on deck if it's a boat or something, just surfaced with no less than 500 psi. Depending on what you want to do, it can change per dive, but you never want to be below 500 when you end the dive, like when you're on the surface. So thumbs up in the dive, time to go up. So managing emergencies, you want to be prepared for them. Have like a save a dive kit. We might go over that a little bit more at like a pool session or something, or somewhere. Take first aid, CPR, oxygen provider, different safeties. You can take a DRAM class. Gabrielle does teach that class. And it's diver rescue accident management. So recognizing serious injuries, decompression illness, also known as the bends, but we usually don't call it that. Embolism, signs and symptoms of it, or ill feeling. Actually, what do y'all think is the most common sign that someone has decompression sickness? What's the most common symptom?
Pain.
Pain where? That's good. What about you, Maddie?
I'm not sure.
Jacob?
So typically joint pain is the main thing. But if you already have joint pain like all the time, which you shouldn't have, then it's probably not that. But if you rarely have any joint pain and all of a sudden you have joint pain after a dive, you should probably get on 100% O2 and start making your way to emergency services just in case. So signs and symptoms, you can be ill feeling, joint pain, visual problems, unconscious would be a big thing, labored breathing, so it's really hard to breathe, loss of sight, bloody froth coming out of like the mouth, coughing or choking, and gets progressively worse, or the heart's completely stopped. So marine life injuries, so these are like stings, cuts, abrasions, and punctures. Make sure the scene is safe. ABS or basic life support. And can anyone tell me what ABC stands for?
Have you ever taken a rescue, any kind of rescue course?
No, I have not.
So if you think about CPR, like what are the things that you check on
You're
a
checking
person?
for like a pulse.
Yeah, so think about like what would that be on a person that you would check? You know, you go and you check and you do 3 things. You check if they're breathing. So it sounds like the B, right? What it is. So it's airway, breathing, and then you check the pulse, which is what? With a C. Circulation. So that's kind of a kind of easy way to remember it, right? Like you put your face or something next to their mouth to check their airway, right? To check if there's air coming in and out. And then you look at their chest to see if it's moving up and down for breathing. And then you check their pulse to see if their heart, if they have a pulse. So is their blood circulating, right? And those would be the 3 things you do prior to CPR. So that's it. For me, to remember it.
So calm, stay calm, reassure. Hot water typically is the best for some different stings and punctures. Vinegar works for jellyfish usually, and involve medical assistance if it is deemed necessary. If it's like a lionfish, or especially like, which I don't think we have any stonefish, but if you were somewhere where there is stonefish, definitely need to have medical assistance. So calling for help, recognize the need. So you need assistance, rescue and begin first aid, like if someone's panicking. Medical help, you can take them to a trauma center, you can dial 911. We usually just use Dan, using cell phones, stay online, provide full location, and they'll ask you like information of what their condition is and other things like that. If unsure, call Dan, it stands for Divers Alert Network, and that's their number right below. And I think we have Dan stickers with their number and everything. So dive planning, planning factors, make sure you're in good health, check the climate, how the distance for travel and everything, and weather. Are you rested, nourished, qualified, and apprehensive, capable of doing the dive? Advanced planning would be why, who, where, when, and how, such as like, why are we going over here? Who are we diving with? Where are we diving? When are we entering? When are we exiting? What gas, how long, etc. So preparation, check equipment, check buddy's equipment. They're going to check your equipment, make sure everything's functioning. On site, make sure weather conditions are good, and check your dive profile, especially if you've done previous dives, check your residual nitrogen and plan a dive from that. So learning the dive tables.
Now would be a great time to go ahead and get your dive tables out from your student packets.
So once both of you have your dive tables out, I'll go over all the different parts.
Where are the dive tables at?
They should
They're in the
be-
student packets with the books.
I'll get it for you. It's
It's
still
the
inside
single
the
sheet, like
backpack.
it's a single sheet of
I'll
paper,
bring it
8
to
by
you.
10.
Yeah, my mom has them.
And they are waterproof, by the way. So
Okay.
you've got it, Will, and mom's getting it for you, Maddie.
Yeah, she's just gonna get it for us.
Okay, great. Might be a good time for a stretch break. Did you see the kitten? That's one of my foster kittens. I'll tell you what, Jacob, Will, are you still with us?
I also dropped it into the chat box.
Oh, perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Will, yeah, you can go ahead and start, Jacob. Go ahead and begin.
All right, so when looking at your dive table, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not.
Yeah, we
Um,
can see it.
So on the upper chart, on the far left, this shows meters. These two columns are for your depth. So meters, feet. So most of this kind of gives you an idea how to run through it. How to start here. So we'll be using feet, and then the maximum time you can be at this depth in feet is the next column, which is the maximum no stop time. So that'll tell you the max for that depth, the time you can spend there. So let's take 50 feet, for example. You'll run over to, let's say we're doing 41 minutes. So you'd move over on the boxes till you hit 41, straight to the right of the 50, and then move down to we're an F diver, and this would be your class or group designation. From there, you can figure out your surface interval time, and notice the minimum time is 10 minutes. So these are set as hour and minute. So it's not an hour and 10 minutes or 10. Well, actually, no, it is. So 10 minutes, and then the max for this little box is 52. So if you did 53 minutes, you'd move up, and so on the longer you're up. So for 7 hours, well, 4 hours, 49 minutes is minimum to be back as where you started in repetitive group.
And
So-
this is great so far, Jacob, but if you click forward, it'll really help, I think, them see that there's 3 distinct tables on one side of their paper, and then there's another table on the back. So if you click through and then go to the examples, I think it'll be helpful for them to get an overview first. Yeah.
So you want me to like continue on the slides, or?
Yeah, so table A, table B, table C. He talked about what table A was. Table C he didn't get to, but that's for when you do your second dive.
So this is a basic chart, like how we would draw it out to figure it out using the tables. If you were using a computer, it would be much more bumpy. It wouldn't be this nice straight thing here. So on the far left, down arrow, this is your max depth going down. On the bottom is your actual bottom time. And then on the right is your time to surface.
No, so go ahead and click one more, click forward, please. So bottom time is the time you begin your dive to your safety stop. So all this other stuff in between, no matter what depth you're at, like Jacob said, the computers versus the tables are going to be more conservative when we dive more conservatively. So let's say that you only went to 45 feet for like 3 minutes of your dive. You're going to plan your whole dive based on as if you were at 45 feet the entire time. So you're just going to be extra safe. But it always starts when the moment you descend until you do your safety stop. So when we go 3 minutes, hold this depth, that's when the clock stops on your dive. Okay.
So planning a dive. So this would be where y'all would have to look at your dive tables and figure this out. So what is the max time you can stay at 50 feet?
Um, 80 seconds? No, wait. Sorry, I read the wrong thing.
And I want you to note that not only Jacob told you about the number right next to it, but also if you follow it all the way to where it turns black, that last number is the number that you're looking for. So you'll see that number is in two places. One is next to the depth.
81?
Yeah. What do you see it, Maddie?
Yes.
And so what do you,
80 minutes.
yeah, Will has it. Do you see
Yeah.
it, Maddie?
Yeah, I see it.
And what's the answer?
It's like the letter below it.
No, how long can you stay at 50 feet? Just look at
Oh,
table A.
80.
Yeah, so you both have it. Very good. Very good. Jacob's going to give you some more here.
What do the
So
gray boxes represent?
What was that, Will?
What do the gray boxes represent?
Jacob?
the gray or black boxes, those represent you've passed your no decompression stop, so you enter the decompression part, which we will not be doing decompression. And like, I forget who says it, but most of them say table D, which is the decompression table, is D for dummies.
I
'cause you
say
should
it.
never.
I'm the one who coined that. Yes. We don't ever do table D. That's for dummies. That's people who just messed up. So, but let's continue with the problem. So Jacob put another one up here on the screen.
So how long can you stay at 80 feet?
80, 32 minutes.
Good job.
And then how long can you stay at 100 feet?
18 minutes.
Yep. So moving to decompression theory. So I'll just kind of do that so they're there. So you start with, this is representing how much nitrogen, residual nitrogen you have. So you start with none because you haven't done any dives before this. And then dive one, you would start building up nitrogen, and then you do your safety stop, come up, you have, let's say, this much nitrogen, and then as you do your surface interval, it comes back down. So then you're starting with more nitrogen than you did the first dive. So then notice how this is slightly higher than this one, just because it's shallower. So you go down, and then this would increase again, and then you do another surface interval. So as you dive multiple times in a day, your residual nitrogen will increase, or if you wait a certain amount of time, you can start with none, but that's max time on the surface. We generally do 10 to 15 minutes for a surface interval.
Well, actually on a boat, we always do 1 hour, right? So
Yeah.
it really depends where you're diving. So on a boat, almost always charter boats are going to have you do a 1 hour surface interval. When we do the springs, we have short intervals because we don't want to get really cold. If we're out of the water for an hour and we're sitting in our wetsuits for an hour, we go back in, we're going to be like freezing the second time we go in. So yeah, as Jacob said, the whole point of using dive tables is to watch how much nitrogen you have in your body. Nitrogen is not good, residual nitrogen. So.
Yeah, so because of residual nitrogen, you cannot do a dive to 60 feet for 50 minutes, come up for 2 minutes, and then go back down for the same amount of time in depth. It just doesn't work. So best thing, just get out there and dive. build up diving experience. More experience you have, better a diver you become. And you learn more and more about different dive sites or different locations, different all kinds of stuff. I think that's where, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Aren't there kind of some good practices about diving before and after flying
Yes.
and spacing out your dives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So go ahead, Jacob. You want to answer it?
So typically you want to be, you don't want to dive within 24 hours of flying. You want to make sure you have a good 24 hours or longer. Longer is better, so like a couple days before you go flying. But the minimum is 24 hours.
However, diving after flying is you can hop off a plane and go diving right away.
Mhm.
And so often I go to places where I love to travel, and I've been to 88 countries and got to dive in most of them. And I intentionally, I land somewhere and I've got dives planned immediately. So yeah. Any other questions?
And then don't you want to space them out a little bit in between days if you're going to do a couple dives a day?
Well, that really depends. So for me, I love diving. And so a lot of my trips, I mean, I'm probably more of a diehard diver than most people you'll ever meet. I will go on a trip where I intentionally am doing 5 dives a day.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, and I have done many, many trips like liveaboards where I live on a boat and all you do on the boat is you eat, sleep, and dive. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's 5 dives a day, but it's on nitrox, not on air. You couldn't manage that on air. So yeah, and I dive every single day. Now, if you were on air, you could probably, depending on the dives, if they're reef dives, you could probably do at least a few dives a day, every day if you wanted to. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So we have about 10 minutes left. And so I'm going to get a little bit more into dive planning and dive tables. This is kind of heavy stuff. So just follow along with me and it'll all make more sense. And then our next session, we're going to get into a lot more detail about dive tables. So we're going to talk a little bit more about dive planning and reducing your risk for decompression sickness. We're going to talk about nitrogen saturation, and we've already discussed dive tables versus dive computers. If you are the kind of person who likes to follow along, I suggest you get your classroom notes workbook, and you can go to page 15 and you can fill in the blanks, and sometimes just writing things will help you remember things more. When Jacob put that diagram up earlier, and he showed you where the bottom time is, I mentioned that it starts at the surface and ends at the safety stop. Required decompression diving is too deep and too long. Recreational diving is no required stops diving. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to do a safety stop. It means we're not going to do what's called a decompression stop, a deco stop. As both Maddie and Will already answered, SEI diving limits are 50 feet for 80 minutes, 80 feet for 32 minutes, and 100 feet for 18 minutes. Now, something really important to keep in mind is if you're ever in between on time or depth, you're always going to round up. So go to the next greater time or depth. So Jacob started to tell you about 41 feet. Well, if the box said 40, 41, and you went to 39, you would be rounding up to 41. Ascent rate is no faster than 30 feet per minute. And again, that's hand over hand. It's really slow. It's much slower than your bubbles, 30 feet per minute. For high altitude diving, like if you want to go to the mountains and dive, I know I've dived in some high altitude places, including in the Philippines and Hawaii and places like that, you're going to be even more conservative. So you're going to reduce your times and depths more. So you're not going to push the limit. Okay. For flying after diving, you wait 12 to 24 hours. So let's say that your last dives were some shallow reef dives off the coast of wherever you were. You know, they were some shallow reef dives, then you didn't actually go 1 atmosphere below the surface. Then you might, you know, get away with not waiting 24 hours. The thing is, waiting 24 hours can never hurt you. And so you're always best to err on the side of caution. If you do ever get nitrox certified, that will give you a little more leeway so that you're going to be safer at the 12-hour instead of the 24. Residual nitrogen time is time against the next dive. So it's a little penalty against the next dive. Total dive time is residual nitrogen time plus the next dive time. So once we get into dive tables, you're going to see actual bottom time, and then we're going to add the little penalty of residual nitrogen time in to get the total dive time, which is the residual nitrogen time plus the next dive time. Safety stop should end all dives for 3 minutes at 15 feet. 3 minutes at 15 feet. Now, when might you not do a safety stop? When do you think you might not do a safety stop?
Like an emergency, like if you're completely out of oxygen.
Yeah, well, just remember, we're not diving on oxygen. Why aren't we diving on oxygen, Will?
Because 75% of it is nitrogen.
Yeah, so 70, so a little more than that, right? So 21% is oxygen. So oxygen is toxic at depth. So you want to make sure that your language reflects, you know, you're not diving on oxygen. So yes, one time you might not do a safety stop is if you have an emergency. Another time you might not do a safety stop is, let's say it's a really shallow reef. It's a 20-foot deep reef. It wouldn't make sense to do a safety stop at 15 feet. In fact, the general rule of thumb is if it's less than 1 atmosphere below the surface, that you're diving, let's say 30 feet, then you don't need to do a safety stop. Okay. Repetitive dives account for previous dives that day, typically within 12 hours. So just to go over, do you have all those written down? You still working on it, Maddie? I see you writing.
I'm writing the last one.
Yeah, no worries. I'll wait.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, great. So with dive tables, as Jacob mentioned, table A is single dive time and group letter. So this is where you're going to find your time, and then you're going to follow it down and you're going to grab whatever letter it is. Table B, the one below it, is surface interval credit. This is where basically, because you're spending time between your dives at the surface, you're offloading some of that nitrogen. And so it's helping you have less nitrogen when you go into your second dive. Table C, the one on the bottom left, gives you your residual nitrogen time and your next dive time. And this is when things start to get a little more complicated, and we won't get too much, actually won't get into this tonight. But that's something that you want to keep in mind, is table C is when you start to do more than one dive. And then finally, table D on the backside, if you flip it over, is for decompression diving. And we are not decompression divers. And so you would only use this in the event of an emergency. I did mention that these are waterproof, so you can actually put these in your BC pockets and carry them with you. But I've never had an unplanned decompression dive. There's no need for this. If you are a safe diver, you're watching your depth, you're watching your time. Okay. All right. So let me give you a problem. And I'm just going to give you maybe one or two problems before we call it a night here. So problem A, let's just say, and I'm going to follow you. I'm going to give you the answer, and then you're going to do a problem. Okay. So, problem A says that you dive to 60 feet for 40 minutes. So what you're going to do is, on your dive table, you're going to find where the 60 is, and then you're going to go across and find the 40. And of course, you're going to round up if you don't see the 40. So everyone see where that is? Okay.
Yep.
And then you're going to follow that down, and that's going to give you a letter. What letter do you see?
G. I see G.
60 for 40, you see G.
Yeah.
Will, what do you see?
So we're talking about 60, right? So we're going down there and that's
Yeah.
being H.
Yes, H. Do you see that?
Why is it H?
Look at the line.
So if you follow the 60 across, do you see the number 40?
No.
Right. So what do you do with it? You round up, right?
Oh, you round it up. Okay, I was rounding
Yeah.
39 up to 40.
Yeah. So what do you round up to?
45.
Right. And then you follow it down, and what letter do you see?
H. Okay,
Yes.
that makes a lot more sense.
Very good. So we follow the H, and then we're going to stay out. We're on a dive boat. So like most dive boats, we're going to stay out for 1 hour. During that hour, typically you're switching your cylinder over. It goes by really fast. You're getting snacks, you're getting lunch, whatever. And so then if you find where it goes between 53, do you see where the 53 is? So where the 1 hour would fall between. So the 1 hour doesn't fall between 10 and 52, right? It falls between 53 and what? On table B, do you see that?
Would be-
Do you see where 1 hour is right here?
right.
So these numbers are a range. And so you're going to find where the 1 hour falls between. So it doesn't fall between 10 and 52. It falls in the box above it, which is 53 to what?
53. 53 to 1 hour and 44 minutes.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Do you see that, Will?
So just the one right next to it.
Yeah. Do you see it, Will?
You're on mute, Will.
Okay.
Sorry, I was saying it's at the 144 and
Yes. Yes. So you do
53.
see it. Okay. Phew. All right.
Sorry.
Good. I was like, oh no, we have a meltdown. Okay, good. So then you're going to follow it over, and you have dropped a whole letter. You're now a G. You're a G diver. So you offloaded that nitrogen and you went from an H to a G. And then our second dive, we're going to say that our second dive, we're going to go to 50 feet. And the question is, how long can we stay? So we follow the G over to where the 50 is. And I want you to notice on table C that it's the top row. See the top row? The top row actually has the depths. Instead of like table A where it's on the side, it's on the top. So then you follow the 50 down to where the G intersects, and you're going to see two numbers there. You're going to see a 49 on top and a 31 on the bottom. So bottom number is bottom time. So the question is, how long can you stay? The bottom number is the right answer. So it would be 31. You see that? Okay. So this is what it looks like on a chart. So 60 for 40, 1 hour surface interval. We want to go to 50 feet. How long can we stay? By the way, anytime you begin a dive, you always start as an A diver. Your letter is A. So we were an A diver, and then we're an H diver, and we stayed out for 1 hour. We're now a G diver. We want to go to 50 feet. How long can we stay? Residual nitrogen time was 49, and 31 minutes is the answer. And just so you know, 50 for 80, how did they get these numbers? Because we know that the max time for 50 is 80. They take 80 minus the residual nitrogen time to get that number. Okay. So when you see a dive problem, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to be filling in the letters and the numbers to give you an answer. Okay. All right. We're going to do a lot more the next time we meet. I didn't give you a chance to give you your own problem, but when you are actually doing them on paper, it's going to look like this. And this is what we're going to fill in. The circles are where you're going to put the letters, and you're going to put your bottom time and your residual nitrogen time and your actual bottom time. But we'll do all that next time. Okay. So what I want you to do is really read your book for the next time we meet. It's going to be very brain intensive. We're going to be going through a lot of dive problems. And I think that, you know, starting off with dive problems, it should go really smoothly. Okay. Any
Just
questions?
real quick,
Yeah.
I'll just add something really quick is now that we got to that last slide, not the one that was empty that we're going to work on next time, but the one right previous to that. If you guys pull up this lecture and go to the slide where Jacob was showing you the blue with the teal, when it has it, like, so do a side by side now that you see where the teal is into it to that last one that Gabrielle just walked with you. And that'll really help you get an understanding of the nitrogen in your body. So you start with dark blue, that's called A, right? So if you think about it, like now we have to add letters that have to share this space, right? And then so then when you're hanging out on the surface, some of the letters go away, but then they're still there. So initially you could go 50 to 80, but because now you still have that 49 left over, you have to subtract that from your 80 because it's still in there. And that kind of helps you understand like how your body is internalizing that nitrogen and how much of it goes away. And that's why you have to reduce your time later on as you continue diving.
All right. Thank you, Ximena. I know it's a lot. So do your best to read through the whole book if you can before our next lecture. It'll just make it go more smoothly. Okay. Any
And
final
you
thoughts or
guys have
questions?
read all the way through chapter 4 right now, right?
Yeah.
Good. Very good. It's pretty easy reading, I think. Right? A lot of pictures. Not too bad. All right. Well, thanks for being here tonight. And thank you, Ximena and Jacob, for your teaching. Good job, everybody. And Maddie and Will, we'll see you next time. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.